So what exploded in the immediate aftermath of the lockdown was inequality on full display in television and in print media and all around us. And I think what the thought in my mind was that it took a pandemic for us to awaken to the problem of inequality in India. This I'm talking about news media that otherwise very conveniently omits a mention of the poor migrant in the city. It's usually focused on the elites, the politicians, the celebrities, and news around that.
Hey Agrima ma'am, and hello everybody. Welcome to Different Boat Same Storm. My name is Atharv.
And my name is Abhay, and this is a podcast aimed at kindling empathy amidst the global pandemic.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Agrima ma'am. And we're delighted to have you with us today. And you and I go long back before this. It's been almost 3 years now when we met at a conference which was very much like this podcast in that it was trying to bring people together and engage in conversations and dialogue. So you and I go way back. And I know because of that you go by many titles and many roles. So I'm going to let you take that on and introduce yourselves to our audience.
Okay, thank you very much, Atharv, Abhay, and Eli, who's going to be joining us later. Let me begin by congratulating, the three of you on this excellent endeavor, starting this video podcast series, Different Boat, Same Storm. I think it's an excellent initiative, and I'm very grateful that you've invited me today to share my thoughts and keep it up. So, by way of an introduction, I am a senior educational consultant here in India. I work with schools and colleges, organizations, to design enrichment programs for young people, students, faculty members, staff members at organizations. I look at education policy in India in particular, but as I like to say in all of my introductions, I'm also a daughter, a wife, a friend, and a mentor to many, and a passerby and a stranger to all those who cross my path. So that's my introduction.
Now, I know that as a member of one of your workshops, I know how dependent they are on engagement and interaction and collaboration. And I'm assuming that with this pandemic, that must all have changed. And I'm wondering how that has changed, because I, for one, cannot imagine how YLC would have worked out had it been over a Zoom call instead of us being there in person. So I'm very curious to hear how that is looking like right now.
Yes, I think that's a good observation. Of course, physical distancing norms that have come into place, leading to lockdowns across the world, making it difficult for us to connect in person, loses out on the human touch, the face-to-face interactions, the encouragement, the engagement, the debate, the discussion that we have when we meet each other. However, I think online technology or online education mode that most of the schools and colleges have moved towards is proving to be both a boon and bane, in this pandemic. I have been taking workshops online, and of course, the movement that I like during a workshop, or the field immersion, the experiential learning component is not a component that I can fully unleash when I'm online, but a lot of the aspects of facilitation where I am keen on listening to the students, to the faculty members, to organizational staff members, really share their hearts, pour their thoughts out, self-reflect, do activities. I'm able to maintain that during online sessions as well, with 70 to 100 students and members at one time. But there is no doubt that the face-to-face conversations and what that does, is something that we all are missing during this pandemic.
And you bring up that loss of human connection.
Yes.
So here in, across Canada, especially in BC, Eli and I had the experience where we went into a lockdown, but it seemed like the world was still running to a small extent. India, on the other hand, had one of the most strict lockdowns in the entire world. Can you talk about, you're based in Delhi, can you talk about being in the heart of India? What was that experience like, having everything just completely closed down, and what was that impact on you and the people that you know?
Sure. So, interestingly, as far as I'm concerned, I have always preferred to work from home as a consultant, because a lot of my work requires thinking, reading, writing, and solitude at home gives me that kind of, that's the fertile soil in which I thrive. So for me, it wasn't a big change to work from home. However, people I know, organizations I've previously been a part of, and friends and family, extended family members as well, have found the lockdown very challenging. People are so used to waking up in the morning, showering, leaving for work, and then spending the day over there and then coming home, that now that they were at home, in the face of their families, there were a lot of adjustments that had to be made. There were tempers flaring. There was a lot of gender dynamic on display, because you have men and women as working professionals. A lot of women who had to be at home and take care of their professional work and take care of the household responsibilities, I think felt extremely burdened by the lockdown, because also young couples who I know, and even not so young couples whose children were not going to school anymore because of the schools shutting down. Now you have to take care of your work, you have to take care of work at home, and you have to take care of your kids. I think it proved to be quite a stressful experience for a lot of individuals. However, we also heard stories of men rising to the occasion and, taking to the kitchen and taking care of kids in the most wonderful manner. So I think that was really heartening to learn that, that kind of caregiving responsibility, which we usually do not give a lot that much priority to, was being shared by men and women equally. Also, one of the highlights was that a lot of families got to spend a lot of quality time together. Otherwise we are so busy running our rat race that we don't get that kind of time with our families. So I know for a fact that my own father, who is a neurosurgeon and has been working for years, and going to his clinic and tending to patients, he was at home for the first time, and spending the kind of quality time that my mother would have liked him to spend a lot more. So we were really happy that he's home. But he eventually had to open his clinic pretty early on, because you cannot say no to patients with head injuries, road accidents, whatnot. And an interesting insight that he gave us was that there were fewer cases of road accidents because, there were travel restrictions. So, but other than that, I think what I've just mentioned is related to the privileged classes, but what India should have thought through is that it is a country with a great class divide, with deep inequality running very deep. And when the Prime Minister came on television and announced the lockdown, that was about 8 p.m., in the last week of March, around the 24th of March. And he said that within 4 hours, the lockdown is to be imposed. So in 4 hours, you saw people scampering to the markets and stockpiling and really filling their refrigerators in a hurry. But what we did not think through is how this severe lockdown was going to impact the teeming millions across the city who are not living in the safe comforts that we're living in, who are not cushioned by incomes the kind that we are earning, who are perhaps homeless, across the world, in fact, not just here, who are migrants to this city and are paying rents through daily wage earning. So when businesses shut, you're not earning your daily wages, you're not filling your stomachs. How do you take care of your families? Where do you get your next 2 meals from? So what exploded in the immediate aftermath of the lockdown was inequality on full display in television and in print media and all around us. And I think what the thought in my mind was that it took a pandemic for us to awaken to the problem of inequality in India. This, I'm talking about news media that otherwise very conveniently omits a mention of the poor migrant in the city. It's usually focused on the elites, the politicians, the celebrities, and news around that. So you initially had the media putting the spotlight on a lot of migrants who were walking back home. Now they have homes miles and miles and kilometers away, and no transport was arranged for them. And that was one of the biggest mistakes, which the government realized maybe 40-50 days after 2 rounds of lockdown, starting special trains, starting flight services, starting transport services. By that time, we had seen some heartbreaking visuals of people, young kids, migrant workers, men, women, families trudging back home. Some of them lost their lives while traveling back home. And, it was a tragedy. It was really a humanitarian crisis. It still is, that these were people who had come to the cities with so much hope. This was these cities, Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Calcutta. These are the cities that they had hoped from. These were the greener pastures, and these cities failed to even provide them or shelter them during this pandemic. So what we really saw and continue to see were heartbreaking visuals of a lot of these migrants who actually fuel the service economy, being abandoned by their cities and their states, and walking back home desperate to seek comfort and 2 meals, and perhaps the love of their families, and that was very challenging and continues to be a challenge even as we talk.
Initially, I was optimistic about the fact that since we are experiencing this collectively, there will be a lot more understanding from our politicians and our policymakers and from society in general. And with all the media attention that it was getting initially, that's what I was hopeful for. But then, given how quickly it has suddenly just moved away from that, and it's become so inherently politicized, makes me wonder if there's any hope at all about things getting better, or rather, I'm concerned that they might just get worse.
Sure. So, that's a valid observation. You know, one of the things that has been extremely striking is the indifference towards the suffering amongst the middle classes, the upper middle classes, the wealthy, individuals in the society. And remember, we live in a soundbite society where, 24/7 news is a cycle that you have to fill, and airtime is expensive, and they'd rather not spend it on, talking about the lives of poor migrants. So initially there was shock and dismay and despair among everyone, whether it was people around us or the Twitteratis, people on Facebook, whatnot, that on the plight of the teeming millions who were sort of walking back. However, it soon faded away. And even though people were still criticizing the government, expecting the government to do, a quick fix or bring about a quick fix solution to the problem, I wanted to ask most people around, what are you doing in this pandemic? What is it that you are doing? And as Martin Luther King Jr. said, one of life's most persistent and urgent questions is, what are you doing for others? Of course, we have to ask that question from our governments, but we also have to ask that question to ourselves and to those around us, because there is great power in individual kindness and compassion and individual outreach to people. So I think the hope really came from that individual outreach. Of course, the government many days later came out with an economic stimulus package, providing the necessary food packets and other things for the poor, but that was certainly not adequate. However, I was compelled to write a piece. An article that I wrote during the pandemic was titled, "Do You Have Ubuntu?" Now Ubuntu is an idea that was popularized by Desmond Tutu in his book God Has a Dream. And Ubuntu really is this attribute of, someone who has Ubuntu is someone who is generous, someone who's compassionate, someone who's warm, someone who's willing to share and care and go the extra mile for other people. And what Desmond Tutu said was that, so if I were to say that, Atharv, you have Ubuntu, or Abhay and Eli, you have Ubuntu, it was high praise in the traditional African worldview, because if you had Ubuntu, then you really understood that a human being requires another human being to survive, to live, to thrive. Even when we were born, we didn't even know how to eat, how to sit, how to wear clothes, how to walk, how to crawl. We needed our parents, our mothers, our siblings, grandparents. It takes a village to raise a person. We needed all these people around us, and it continues. We all live in webs of loving mutuality and interdependence, and I think that's what really signifies Ubuntu. So it translates into, I am because we are. The recognition that I am human in your presence, and you are human in my presence, and therefore we are tied together. Like you said earlier on, people don't have to know me or know you, but we are human beings, and that in itself is a connection. So I think when you understand Ubuntu, what it really means is what Desmond Tutu spoke about was that, in an African village, if the local chief, someone who was called the local chief, if he had a lot of, say, cattle and oxen and land and a big house, but if he didn't have Ubuntu, he was a lesser mortal, he was sort of subhuman. So, and meaning even if he had the designation of a local chief, and if you were to understand its relevance in our lives, you and I could have studied at the best universities, had the best qualifications, gone to the best schools. Tomorrow we'll have a fancy title to our name, probably earning a 7 or an 8 figure salary, but if we don't have Ubuntu, and if we are not people who are willing to be generous and thoughtful about others, and reaching out to others very consciously, then in Desmond Tutu's words, we are subhuman. So I think that's really the idea of Ubuntu. I'm happy to elaborate, but if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to take them on.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen so much during this pandemic. I mean, 2020 is the year that never ends, and we've seen some horrible things. We've seen governments failing to take action. We've seen people being left behind. But as you bring up, we've also seen a lot of people come together, support one another, and showcase that Ubuntu that you talk about.
Yeah.
So moving forward now, considering everything that's already happened in India and the world throughout this pandemic, do you have hope? Do you have hope that things are going to get better for your personal life, for society around you? And do you think that there is a reason to be hopeful for everything that is to come?
And to add to that, if I may, how do we kindle Ubuntu? How do we foster Ubuntu as a central tenet of life?
Okay, great. I mean, your questions are, definitely related, and very good questions. I definitely have hope. There's a line that I keep reiterating, and my husband and I keep reiterating to each other, saying that hope never fails. And I think we do have hope, and the hope resides in the idea of Ubuntu, because each of us is capable of unleashing our innate Ubuntu, during this pandemic, and even as we talk. And that's where my hope comes from. Because if you have Ubuntu, you will realize that there are people around you who are suffering. There are mouths around you that you can help feed. There are situations around you that with your intervention can get better. If you are, living in a society where there are guards and there are domestic helps and drivers and gardeners, what can stop us from cooking extra meals for them? What can stop us from transferring a certain amount that can sustain them? What can stop us from buying extra food kits and vegetable packets and toiletries and the rations that they require? If each of us can commit to, say, supporting 2 families or 3 families, and for people who can do much more than that, supporting those many families, we are creating circles of Ubuntu in and around us, and that's really where my hope comes from. And it's not just about supporting those who are going hungry. It's also about being mindful and thoughtful towards others. If you have a friend or if you have someone in the family or a friend circle who has lost his or her job, reach out to that person. I'm sure that it isn't a great place for that person to be. Reach out to that person, talk to them. If you have grandparents who are lonely or alone, pick up the phone and call them. If you have friends who need encouragement and cheering and are feeling the blues, take time to consciously connect with them, because generosity is not about material resources. It's also about your quality time and your thoughtfulness towards another person. And I'm sure you've heard that mental health is a serious concern during this pandemic, because so many people are not used to being at home. They are used to running on the treadmill of life, hopping from one place to another, going to work, coming back. They were in a routine. That routine got busted, and now they are unable to cope with the changes. Some of us are naturally more resilient, but others are not, and that does not mean that we are in a position to judge them. So we might as well reach out to them, assure them that there is hope on the other side of it. So I would certainly encourage each of us to reach out to the people who are around us. You can make a difference where you are. You don't have to travel to another country. Now you anyway cannot. You don't have to travel to another place far off to help someone in need. There is need and suffering around you. We only have to look up and heed that suffering. And I think one of the points that I do want to make is, we prevent our Ubuntu from coming out or being active and alive by staying in a me first, self-focused mode. It's about my life, my career, my work, my job, my income, my family, and that prevents us from thinking of other people in the world as our family, as Desmond Tutu would like us to think. He asked a very pertinent question, which I talk about in my piece. He said that, are we going to allow members of our family, our brothers and sisters, to go hungry? Are we going to allow them to sleep without a good meal in their stomachs? And the answer is no. So why can we not fashion the same kind of compassion and understanding towards those around us who we are not directly related to? So we prevent Ubuntu, our own Ubuntu, by being consumed with our own life and our own worries and fueling our own dreams and aspirations at the cost of an opportunity that is lying right in front of us, and that opportunity is asking us to serve others. And I think it's also that service-oriented leadership in the world is the kind of leadership that we want to see. And these are not going to be leaders who are the so-called leaders that we know, but each of us can be that leader with his or her Ubuntu unleashed and creating circles of empathy and kindness wherever we go.
Wow. I think I resonate with that so much, because that speaks to this idea of having this collective responsibility for those around us, not because we can and not because we should, but rather because we must, because we ourselves thrive on that, and it's only fair. The system only works when everybody engages with that,
Yes.
whether it be on a personal level, on a micro level, or on a more global macro level. And I think that's very important for us to assimilate within ourselves whenever we take up any task. And on that note of collective responsibility, I think it's only fair that we invite our friend Eli back into the conversation, and let's see what he has to say.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. This has been a very fun conversation to listen into, and I actually want to poke in on something that both of you just mentioned. What I find really interesting about this conversation is that divide between the macro level and the micro level. And so you talked at the beginning of this conversation a lot about how we saw changes in the gender dynamic in India and how inequality was on full display, and that led to a brighter spotlight, especially on disadvantaged people. And I think that there's been great, as you say, there's been some great societal shifts like that have been really powerful. But I also like that you're pointing out the propensity for individuals to create change. You talk about individual outreach and Ubuntu. One of the things I've been thinking about, especially as we've been doing this podcast, and I'm sure you have in the work you've been doing, in the outreach you've been doing with individuals and with groups, is this idea that nowadays there's a lot of value seen in writing letters or protesting or making big speeches, which not everyone has the platform to do. Some of those actions are very accessible to all people, but not all of them. And then even on the level of conversation, I think about a podcast like this, where we're having a conversation about important issues, but the idea is that it's important because it's recorded and because it's going to be distributed to the masses, because we have a massive fan base, as we all know. And I'm just slowly. I'm just thinking about whether, when it comes to what you've been talking about the individual's ability to create change, is it actually possible nowadays to have a conversation one-on-one with a single person that isn't recorded, that doesn't have a greater purpose, and for that to be important?
Eli, welcome to your own, video podcast. And I think you've asked a very interesting question, and the answer is yes. And I'll give you an example. What I'm saying is not just what I'm preaching. It is because I practice it that I'm so passionate about it. And my husband and I have been very consciously reaching out to people around us. And the other day we saw this news item about a couple and what they are doing and so on and so forth. And I don't think that doing something for someone should be done for the sake of self-glorification. And you are so right that whether it's organizations or individuals or governments, they are tweeting about it, they are posting about it on Facebook, they are writing about it in print media, and unless that happens, it is as though the outreach doesn't make sense and should not be done, because you want to be in the spotlight for serving others, whereas so there's a beautiful verse in the Bible that says that don't let your one hand know what your other hand is doing, and do it in secret. Don't let one hand know what the other hand is doing, and your Father in heaven will bless you. So I think the divine powers that we believe in, and I'll tell you another thing. There's another verse that says, kindness, your love, your generosity towards the poor is a loan to God, and He will reward the lender. Now that idea I find just beautiful, because it's like you're in conversation. If you believe in God, then you're in conversation with Him. You know that outreach to someone who is in need is God's purpose for you. If you don't believe in God, then you're accountable to yourself as a human being who's seeing suffering around himself or herself, and what are we doing about it? I think there is tremendous value in individual kindness and outreach and compassion, and there are many individuals around us who are engaged in it. They are not people who are doing this for the glory, for self-glory and for name or fame and to become popular, but are doing it because they are who I call servant leaders. These are not people seeking to be served themselves. These are people who are out there and serving others. I know scores of examples of people who are feeding dogs and birds and human beings around us, and doing it so beautifully and consistently and day after day. And these are the invisible corona warriors all around us. I think there's enormous hope in that kind of action. One of the fine examples that I want to give you, because I was so touched by this gesture, as a result of us helping out our gardener. Now here's a person who is struggling to survive himself, and with a little aid from us, it gave him so much joy that he returned the next day with a bag full of fruits and fresh mint leaves that he cut out from wherever he works. And my husband and I looked at each other and thought, well, gratitude in this person's heart. I mean, we were so overwhelmed by his gesture that while he does not have plenty, he wanted to come and share something with us. And he didn't stop the next day. He came back the third day and brought something with him. And I said, please don't bring anything, because I'd like you to, keep it for yourself. But just to let you know that, I think he's a phenomenal person. And let me tell you, in this lockdown, when people have been a lot of people who've been at each other's throats because they can't bear to live with each other, my gardener is a real hero, because he's someone who, I think he has a family of 4 or 5 individuals, but one of his nephews and his nieces got stuck at his place during the lockdown. So he was feeding about 9 mouths during the lockdown without a single complaint, from his mouth. He never asked for help. And that's what I mean by Ubuntu. There are people around us. He has a great deal of pride in him, and he never said that I need help. But when we inquired about his situation, we realized that that's a lot of mouths to feed, during a lockdown, and were able to assist him. But people like us who are privileged have been complaining about how the pandemic has upset our cart and turned our world upside down, and our travel plans are busted, and our work plans have been disrupted. But I think change is the only new normal. Even after a few months, change is still going to be the new normal. So the sooner we realize that, the faster we'll adapt to, a pandemic like this. So I hope that I've answered your question.
Oh, absolutely. And I love what you were saying at the beginning about this idea that whatever belief system you ascribe to, fundamentally, we can have faith that people are generous and are trying to do things for others. The thing that I'm curious about is in that story about the gardener, aside from clearly a kind of fundamental desire to be generous and to see someone else thrive and to do something kind for another person, I wonder, with the distance that we're all experiencing, if the fact that our observation of people's gratitude and of when we do something great, the satisfaction of seeing someone appreciate that act, I know that there's plenty of different camps of people, and there's certainly the camps of people who say that we only do things selfishly, even if that selfishness is the selfishness of wanting to see someone be grateful for something you do. And whether you believe that or not, the idea that a lot of what we do is bolstered by the fact that we know that we can see the impact of our actions. And so in a time and space where we can't as easily see the impact of the good things we're doing, do we still have the motivation to do those good things if the reward isn't as clear?
Absolutely. I think that ours is to do and forget about what impact it is creating, how deep that impact is. But if you are driven to reach out to more and more families who are genuinely in need, then that's your work, and it really stops at you reaching out to that person and trying to alleviate that person's situation or plight. But this is a very interesting question, because a lot of the development sector today is bent on detail mapping the impact of their actions. Today, if a project in the development world cannot show the impact that it is happening, then perhaps future funding does not come. And I've been critical of that, because a lot of organizations struggle to document that kind of impact that their work definitely has. And because they struggle to document that kind of work, because a lot of them are reaching out to individuals in far-flung remote areas, and you cannot always document that work. But I think that if you are a grant maker, a donor, and you have a robust proposal in front of you, and you know that this is well thought through, this is going to reach out to people, then I think that you have to go with a basic level of trust, which is not to say that you should not have any accountability measures. Nobody is saying that you dole out your money without any kind of accountability measure built in, but let us also not tie up or entangle reaching out to someone with a definite reward. Reaching out in itself is an act that will be rewarded, so yeah.
Well, that's a very noble idea, because it almost puts the onus on the act and the process itself rather than any kind of result or reward that stems from it. And I think that is an idea that we can inculcate, not just with this, but in every aspect of our lives, where there are factors beyond our control. So the only thing that we can do from our side is act on our own, in our capacity, with our resources, in our circumstances, and then just let the rest to, if you believe in God, then God. If you believe in any other higher power than that, and if not, then just in yourself, keeping in mind that you did whatever you could do. And from what I understand, that is the core of Ubuntu, where you're doing whatever you can for the communities and the people around you within your capacity, which is why everybody can do their best and should do their best. And there's no comparison till the time we're all doing what we can to make the communities that we live in and the people that we live with happier and more prosperous, and just more understanding and empathetic of each other, which is what we hope to be doing, especially in this pandemic, when hope, empathy, optimism, and love for one another and for the greater community that we belong to is needed more than ever. And I think those are all things that everybody should try and inculcate within their lives.
Yeah.
Sure. Can I come in here with a few thoughts?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I think one of the things that I wanted to say was that, while it has been heartbreaking to see the kind of indifference that we've seen all around, there are also islands of great hope, because we've reached out to people, very consciously to help with fundraising, and as individuals, and I'm talking about as individuals, and people who know us, who trust us, have really come forward in a generous manner. You don't have to tell them what the reward is. You don't have to tell them how we are going to go about it. All we said to them was, there is great need, and can you help? And so for students like yourselves and your friends, and even individuals like myself, there is great hope in actions that, and remember, empathy starts with a thought, but it has to result in an action. Empathy is an action, and we must believe in that, and go out there, fundraise, learn about the need in your area, tie up with your university. Your university is supporting this initiative, and that's really kudos to them. And I'm sure that if you all decide to come together and harvest that collective Ubuntu, that you already harvested for this podcast series, then I'm pretty sure that you can make some excellent outreach work happen. And I think the other thing that I really wanted to mention was, we've always been asked to, I think Atharv knows these particular themes. We've been asked to be a go-getter. Like I said, the me first mentality, go-getter, doing the next thing in our lives, chasing after the goals and dreams that we have. But this pandemic really asks us to pause and be a go-giver instead. It's time for us to be go-givers and keep giving till your heart's content, really. And I would say that I must congratulate you on the name of this video podcast, Different Boats, Same Storm. And I must say that the nature of the storm has changed, or thickened rather, from a health emergency to an economic emergency to a humanitarian crisis. But if you were to find Ubuntu in the very name of your podcast series, you would have to realize that some of us are in boats that are the size of yachts or ships. They are very secure. They have food provisioning, safe drinking water. You have a nice umbrella, you can sit out. And those boats are not going to sink anytime soon. But as long as we are conscious that there are boats out there that are falling apart, and that maybe we could steer our yacht or our ship towards those boats and help them stay afloat, that is going to get us all through this storm. And that's really Ubuntu. And I don't know if you know the story behind Ubuntu, the word. I'll be happy to share if you're interested.
I
Please,
think,
yes.
Yeah.
I really want to hear.
No, I know.
Okay.
I'm literally thinking, like, what is it?
Okay, so the story goes like this, and you can even read it, on the net later. There are multiple versions of the story. There was an anthropologist studying a particular community in Africa, and after he was done with his study, he left as a parting gift, he left a basket of fruits and sweets under a tree. And he wanted the kids from that neighborhood to go grab that hamper, that basket. So he told them, he said, be ready in a line. And when I say go, the first one to grab that basket wins the basket, And when he said go, the kids instinctively held each other's hands and ran towards the basket together. When they reached the tree, they sat around that basket and shared the goodness of that basket together. And when the anthropologist asked, this little girl, why did you do that? Why did you all run together? I told you only, one person could win the basket. She said, how can one of us be happy if the rest of us are sad? And that is what Desmond Tutu described as the philosophy behind Ubuntu, which is that I am because we are. And that's what common humanity is. And I hope that the post-COVID world or during COVID world leads us towards the creation of more empathetic and more compassionate societies, and each of us has an enormous role to play.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Agrima, for this amazing conversation where we've talked about everything from the very disproportionate impacts of the pandemic in India, and how beyond being a health and economic crisis, this really is a humanitarian crisis. And as you beautifully put it, while some people are in the thick of this heightening storm, and it's getting worse day by day, other people are in yachts and have the ability to help. While there are certainly government actions and policy changes that need to be made, it is up to us as individuals to take personal responsibility and work towards creating a society where we care for one another and where we actively serve and help other people. You mentioned that spirit of virtuousness, that humility, that is Ubuntu. Caring for one another, working together, and creating the society we want to see. On behalf of Atharv, Eli, and I, we are so honored to have you on the show. We're so grateful, and thank you so much.
Thank you to all three of you, and I hope that you unleash your Ubuntu starting now. And excellent initiative once again, and all the very best. And thank you very much to all three of you for having me.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
This was our third episode of Different Boat, Same Storm, a video podcast aimed at kindling empathy amidst a global pandemic. And we hope to see you next week with a different guest in a different boat, but in the same storm. Thank you.